I'm going to show how I take everyday tissue paper and use it as an art tool. So stay tuned. Well, hello and welcome back to another video. That gives me an idea for a video. My name is Jimmy Reyes and I'm a professional comic book illustrator. Welcome to my channel where I share tips, techniques, and an inside look at being a freelance illustrator. So there were several steps and things that had to happen before I decided that I was going to create the planet background. One thing was that, if you notice here, the artwork is by artist David Finch. And Dave sent me an email and he said, I want to add some stars in the background. The guy's in space. I sent a reply email and said, I've got an idea. And what if I put a planet back there so that we have a horizon, so it doesn't look quite so much like it's just kind of floating in space. It'll help add depth to the image. And I sent him a sample of the planet that I had in mind, and Dave, liked the idea, and so I went with it. Now, what I used to create that planet was I knew I wanted it to be a quarter of a planet. I knew I just kind of wanted him to be in the atmosphere above this planet. So I took a large plate. We have a large party plate. It was really big, and so what I did was I flipped it upside down, and I used it as a stencil. So I used that to create the quarter part of that planet. And then I used stencils to create the smaller planets. I decided there were going to be some smaller planets in the background to help kind of create some depth there. So before I can go in and paint my background, I knew that I have to create holding lines, either lines that went around the figure, outlining the figure, so that where the black that I fill around the figure has a gate. It has a point where it knows to go up to and stop at that point, or a note for me just to help my eye. In this case, what I did was I started inking the figure first. Started inking a lot of the figure, inked most of the holding lines around the figure, and then decided that I'm going to start filling in my black. But I would suggest just placing your holding lines all the way around before filling in your black if you've never done this before. So I decided to start filling in black, getting the black of the sky in there. You are going to need to use masking tape. You are going to need to mask some of the area off. I use artist tape, which is a low adhesive masking tape. You can also use paper biscuit, which is basically like tracing paper. It also has an adhesive on the back. Sometimes the tack to that is pretty strong, so I like to stick that to my shirt first so it lowers the adhesive on the back. So then you can mask it off with several different things. It's up to you what you're most comfortable with. So what I do is mask off the area that I'm going to start using my tissue paper. The tissue paper that I prefer to use is the tissue paper from the dollar store. Just the most generic tissue paper, the kind that if you go to blow your nose with, you will blow right through it. It will tear, it will, fray. That is the tissue paper that I'm looking for because it helps create the effect. So what I do is I also take a spare piece or a scrap piece of Bristol board, generally the same exact brand of Bristol board if I can find it, same type. And I cut a piece and I place it on the side of my desk. If you look very closely to the right on your screen, you can see that there is a small piece of paper. It's actually wider. It didn't get in the shot of the camera. So what I do is I drop some ink on there, either using an eyedropper or a brush, and I dip, the brush in, get a lot of ink, and dip it onto that Bristol board. I'll then take my tissue paper and I'll fold it up like I'm making a little ghost. I want a little head on the top of that tissue paper, and it resembles like a ghost you made in elementary school. And so I will dip that into the ink, and then I will scrape the ink on the Bristol board with the tissue paper very quickly, doing left to right strokes, left to right, just very fast, back and forth, back and forth. And then I will look at the tip of the tissue paper to see if it's frayed and torn. If it is, then great. Then what I'll do is I want to start my first stroke in the darkest area. So in the planet, it has a lens flare at the very tip. On the very top of that, there's some type of star back there around behind the planet. So it's peeking out over the planet. So the very tip of that planet is going to be in light. Anything away from that is away from the light source. So it is going to fade into black. So I want to start in the dark black area. So I will then do my first stroke in that dark area, and that lets me know how much ink is on the tissue paper, how the tissue paper is going to react, and just in case it's still placing down too dark of lines, it's okay because it's going to be in solid black. Tissue paper is also a good way if you have a large black area that you want to fill in very quickly. You can drop some ink down onto that bristle board and use that tissue paper to spread it really fast. It allows you to spread it very quickly, very fast, and it keeps the warping and bubbling down to a minimum. Now, any bristle board that you use is going to have a bit of a warp or bend to it when you apply ink, because it gets absorbed into the fibers and then that paper begins to expand. So this is something that you really cannot avoid. But if you use tissue paper and if you spread the ink very quickly, then what happens is the bend or the fold or the warping will then keep down to a minimum because you're spreading that ink very quickly. You can use a brush to do so. If you spread it very fast with a brush, then that helps keep it down to a minimum. Also, if your bristle board has a third layer, third ply, the thicker the ply, the less warping and bending. The paper I'm using here is 2-ply. This is the paper that was sent to me by Dave, and so I couldn't change up the type of paper I had to work with it. Although there's a large amount of black space that has to be filled in, I did spread the ink as quick as possible to keep that down to a minimum. Now back to the tissue paper, because I know you're thinking, Jimmy, I want to know about this tissue paper effect. So the tissue paper effect, what you do is you place the ink by dipping it onto the bristle board. If you can see on the right side, if you keep your eye on the right side, you'll kind of see it peeks in every now and then. You can kind of see the bristle board and where I've spread the ink. Now what I do is I apply 2 different strokes, maybe even 3. One stroke is from right to left or left to right. It's the same stroke, but I will then quickly place that stroke down. It allows some hard cut lines in there, and I don't apply a lot of pressure. The second one that I do is I will then do circular strokes. That does a bit more of gray, and this is when the ink has faded off the tissue paper, when there's very little ink. I do circular strokes. That creates the gray tone. So I have solid black. I have my hard cut lines that are in there. You can see there's some hard cut black lines, and then the gray that's in there because this planet has different gases in its atmosphere. So it's going to transition in and out of these black hard cut lines and some grays to white. And because the planet is going to be away from its sun, then it's going to be solid black on the very end. But to get those gray effects, that's some of the different type of strokes. And what I would recommend doing is taking a blank sheet of bristle board and just play with it. Learn how to use and how to manipulate this tissue paper, how you can fold and roll that tissue paper. The tighter the roll, the smaller the little area, how thicker part of the tissue paper, the different type of width and lines that it gives you, the different type of dark lines, the different hard cut lines that it gives you. Now this is a tool that does take time to master. It isn't exactly going to be completely, I don't want to say reliable, but it isn't always going to be exactly the same. It is pretty random tissue paper, so the lines will be random, and it's a little hard to to corral this tissue paper. It's pretty wild, but the more you use it, the more familiar you get with it, and the more you'll understand and know what to expect from this tissue paper and how to use it. It's really not something that's going to take years. I mean, when I say it's difficult to use, you're going to use this tissue paper for a couple of hours and then go, okay, I'm ready. I'm a master. You're going to carry tissue paper in holsters on each side, your left and right, and ready to flick them out when you're ready to do the artwork like a cowboy, and you're going to whip out this tissue paper and ready to do your magnificent, beautiful artwork. Your beautiful Monets are going to be done with all tissue paper. And there's a lot of different artists online that use tissue paper. And it's something that's actually been used outside of the comic book inking industry. But you will see there are a few artists who have adapted and used it in the comic book industry. And so it's something that I've learned. I generally learned how to ink from couple of people that were a part of Wildstorm, and this is back in the mid 90s. They were my friends and they were my neighbors, and at that time I had no interest in inking, and I was just getting into comic books and doing a lot of doodles and stuff, but never forgot watching them ink and stuff while I was waiting for them. I was like, come on man, finish up so we can go play some basketball. I don't like this comic nerd stuff. So who would have known, man? I caught the bug, and now I am a comic nerd. So I'm heavily addicted to these comic books and artwork. I love the comic medium. It's just amazing. So all right, enough about me. Let's get back to how I am doing this tissue effect. The tissue effect there, you're going to need a wide open area because the tissue is pretty wide. It is not exactly that easy to get into fine little points. You have to roll it up and kind of, contour it and bend it and manipulate it and just kind of knead the tip of it. And don't be afraid of getting your hands full of ink, because you will get some ink on your hands. And so the little areas where you have to get in those sharp little corner areas to fill in, well, what I'm going to do is I'm going to use my artist tape, which is a masking tape low adhesive I mentioned before, and I'm going to place it on to where I want to mask off, and I tape it over the artwork. Because the artwork below has already been inked, it will show through this masking tape, allowing me then to trace an outline and then cut along that outline to have that shape, that general shape. So then what I do is I will then stick the masking tape, or I should say artist tape, because I don't want you to go out and get regular masking tape, because that's not what you want. There is a painter's tape, which is blue. It's a blue masking tape, painter's tape. That may or may not work. It does have a low adhesive. I would rather stick with the artist tape. It's specifically designed for this. So you place it back down, and you want to make sure that you put some pressure down onto the point where you're going to paint up to. So that way it keeps the ink from flowing underneath. So I use the masking area, and it's easier if it's going to be black up to that line to go ahead and just use the tissue paper, and I can just kind of dab it right over the edge of that masking tape, and it allows me to dab in some darker areas. Now if I want to do my stroke, I will then start the stroke on top of the masking tape and then throw that stroke out, throw that line away from it, so that I can feather it out. Feathering it out meaning that I can start with a thicker, more pressure, and then begin to lighten up as if I'm an airplane taking off into the sky. I just throw that stroke and start with pressure, less pressure, less pressure. Eventually I'm off the page, and I'm up in the sky, I'm flying away, So I will then do that with the masking tape, and that's how I create those general effects, and it makes it look as if the planet is all the way behind this character, as if I placed this character on top of that background. And then you want to give it some time, let your ink dry. Once your ink's dried, peel it up, and there could be some little areas you may want to touch up, and I use my brush. I use a Raphael 8404. It is a Klinsky sable brush. It's found in the watercolor section. It is a watercolor brush. It does handle the India ink very well, holds it very well, releases it very well. So it's what I would recommend. There's many different type of brushes out there. There's Winsor Newton Series 7, so you don't have to just use the tools that I'm using here. But I'm recommending that in case you want to follow along, or if you already have this brush, use that brush if you've never tried it before, or if you want to go out and get this brush. So what I do then is use a brush to get very close to the lines, to get those very detailed lines. And this isn't my everyday brush. This is a brush that I've used quite a while, and it's become a little frayed. So I switch up my brushes, and I know the brushes all look alike. I generally put different type of rubber grips on the tip, or in this case it's a foam grip. It's a pencil foam grip, in case you're wondering. I do have a video on how I create brush caps. A brush cap meaning that a cap that you would place over your micron pen. I create that for my brush, so it's easy to store, easy to protect your brush, and it's all for free. It's tips and things that you may have these supplies that I use already in your art studio, in your art supplies. You may already have this stuff, so why not create a brush cap? And it's just a matter of time, and it protects your brush. So if you're interested, in my video library, there is that video on how to create brush caps. So the grip there is a foam pencil grip. I generally use them to color coat my different brushes, so I know which brush is which degree of brush, which is my everyday brush. But in this video here, that brush, I believe, just happened to have the same foam grip. It is frayed, meaning that it will give me wild lines. I am doing a dry brush effect. Very little ink on the bristles or the hair of the sable. And what I'm doing is I'm starting out from the holding line of my figure and then throwing that line out. And I'm doing the same thing. I'm doing a dry brush feather and trying to create the same type of effect that I did with the tissue. It doesn't give me the exact line work that I get with a tissue paper, but it's very similar. So I try to blend it in as much so that it appears as if this planet was completely created behind this figure, and then the figure was placed on top, so that there aren't any halos or any lines in between. Although you can create a halo around your figure if that's the effect that you want, or that if your penciler has already created a halo, and say the penciler is already drawn in the planet and he's created a halo, meaning a white outline around the figure, then you just do the same thing, but up to that point where that halo is. Or if you decide you want to stop your lines at a certain point, creating the halo does make it easier. But for me, I don't really like doing anything too easy. So I don't know why. I do like a challenge. I do like to experiment, try new things, and push my artistic abilities. With each new piece, if I'm not learning something new, then I am I'm not as interested. So I like to try new techniques every time. So then you can also take that brush that's frayed and do these strokes throughout the planet, depending on the type of atmosphere and effect that you want to look. This particular planet, I'm trying to recreate a Mars, a dry planet. There isn't a lot of water. It has a lot of gases on top. So I'm trying to create that effect. Now you will see a lens flare behind the planet. And that's going to be in a follow-up video. I am going to show how I created that lens flare using a ballpoint pen, something that you wouldn't expect. So if you're interested and want to know how I created that lens flare in the background and create the splatter of stars, that's going to be in a follow-up video. So be sure to subscribe if you haven't clicked subscribe, and click the bell notification so that you're notified of any new updates. My updates are roughly about a week apart. So each week you'll get a new video. And don't forget, spread the word. The more viewers that we get, the more people that are joining this channel, the more videos I can make. Thank you so much for joining me. Appreciate you spending your time here with me. My videos are free for you to view. They are in the library. You can watch them at your convenience. And again, my name is Jimmy Reyes. I am a professional illustrator. And you can follow me on Twitter.